cholesterol, and we may delve into some history and stuff. Does anybody have a problem with their cholesterol, or know that they have a problem, or somebody that does have a problem with their cholesterol? So a couple. When your doctor talks to you about your cholesterol, generally they will start talking about your total cholesterol. That is one cholesterol number that they look at initially, and we want that to be under 200. But I say that with an asterisk, because it doesn't necessarily have to be under 200 if the rest of your cholesterol numbers look okay. So then we have our LDL and our HDL. Does anybody know which one is which? Good and bad. How do you guys remember it?
LDL is low, the lousy, and the HDL is the healthy.
Excellent. L for lousy. Yep. L for low or lousy. We want that one to be lower. And H for healthy or happy or high. That's the one we want. You know, the higher the better. So that's an easy way to remember the difference. And then there's one more type of cholesterol called your triglycerides. Your triglycerides are another fat that goes in your bloodstream. And so your LDL, there's different areas that your doctors may want it to be. Some doctors may say under 100. Some people may say like really restrictive under 70. I'd still say like around 100 or whatever. It kind of depends. Your HDL, typically we want that over 40, 45. Some places say over 50. If it's over 60, it's protective to your heart. Just the higher the better. Okay? And then your triglycerides, we want those to be under 150. The lower the better. Okay? So, now that we've gotten through all the numbers and the standards, there's one more thing that I look at, and that is the ratio between your total cholesterol and your HDL. That's your good cholesterol, to see if you're making enough good cholesterol. So if you take your total cholesterol and you divide it by your good cholesterol, and your number that you end up with is under 4, you're doing pretty good. So let's talk about total cholesterol being over 200. Because I know you guys all love math, right? I'm going to keep it nice and easy. If you take 240 as your total cholesterol, and say you have an awesome HDL of 80, what would your ratio be? 3, right? So even though your total cholesterol is 240, it really doesn't matter because you're producing so much good cholesterol, your risk factor for heart disease is fine, right? So when I look at people's cholesterol numbers, that's what I'm looking at. And I'm looking at all those different numbers. And I do look at cholesterol numbers often at the diabetes management program, because people with diabetes are at higher risk for having heart disease. And if you haven't noticed, people with heart disease are at higher risk for having diabetes. Why do you think that is? Any guesses? No? Okay, all right, I'll just tell you. It's all related to the same dietary factors. And of course, genetics plays a role in it. Physical inactivity certainly plays a role in it. You know, genetics, your age, all those things play into it. But if we're just looking at dietary factors, the things that cause diabetes, like we were talking about last time, is the refined grains, the sugars, and what we're finding now is that the refined grains and the sugars are what are causing our cholesterols to go out of whack. So that's why they're so closely related, because they're caused by the same dietary factors. So, sorry. When we go and talk to people about lowering their fat, we've been making this recommendation for 40, 50 years, and unfortunately it was based on bad science. And so what happened was back in 1960s, 1950s, there's a scientist who decided to publish a study, and he had gone around to a bunch of different countries and seen their dietary factors, and he correlated it to their total cholesterol, just looking at the total cholesterol. And he saw that if you had more saturated fat in your diet, then you would have higher amounts of cholesterol and heart disease. That's what he showed in his article, and he had 7 countries that were on this like direct line. The more saturated fat you ate, the more heart disease there was. But there were 22 countries that he actually looked at and had data from. So you had some countries that ate a lot of fat and had low heart disease, and there were a lot of countries that ate low fat and a lot of high carbs and had higher amounts of heart disease. He didn't include those in the study because they didn't prove what they wanted to prove, and he got into the American Heart Association, and then his recommendations got picked up there, and then those got picked up by the USDA, and that's where we ended up with the low-fat craze of the 80s, and everybody trying to reduce their fat and not really caring about snack wells and other sugary things. Jelly beans were recommended because they're low-fat, So we got ourselves into a world of trouble with that misinformation, and over the past, I'd say at least 10 years, we've been going back and re-looking at the science and saying, wait a minute, that's not right, because they've been trying to prove low fat for 40 years, and this as a dietitian is very frustrating because I'm reading all of these scientific articles, and at the end they say conclusion needs more research. Well, if you keep doing the same research and you keep coming up with inconclusive stuff, obviously it doesn't work. So when you go back and you start looking at, and they've taken other studies where they've compared a low-fat diet, high carb, with a low-carb, high-fat diet, like Atkins and the other things, or even Mediterranean, which is not low-fat and does have a healthy amount of olive oil and avocados and natural fat. They find that the low-fat diets really are not beneficial and actually can worsen somebody's heart disease compared to the other diets which actually improve your cholesterol and everything. So that's where we have been, and hopefully we're moving forward. Just this week, actually, we have been afraid of cholesterol in our food because we felt it had to do with our cholesterol in our bodies. And just this week, the USDA is thinking about repealing the advice of no cholesterol or keeping your cholesterol under 200 milligrams because they realize it has nothing to do with your cholesterol. So it's kind of exciting that they're moving forward with those recommendations and repealing some of them. So we have stayed away from eggs and shrimp and lobster because it had dietary cholesterol. And unfortunately, we've missed out on those wonderful foods that have all kinds of great nutrients and that are enjoyable for no reason. So you could have 2 to 3 eggs. Some people have way more eggs per day, every day, and it really has nothing to do with your cholesterol. Now, that being said, some people, because there's always an exception to the rule, some people, if they do, it could bring up your cholesterol some, but for the majority of our population, eating 2 to 3 eggs or more is not going to bring up our cholesterol. If anybody's planning on having a wonderful lobster dinner tonight because it's Valentine's Day, eat it without guilt. Oh, you had it last night. Fantastic. No guilt. The lobster is not going to cause any problems.
I'm not even like it. I don't either.
Well, I'm not really a fan of lobster either, but if anybody does like it, it's completely guilt-free. So what does actually affect our cholesterol? Well, let me bring it back. Talking about saturated fat too. That's the other thing. Cholesterol, saturated fat both have been associated with higher cholesterol. And so when they looked at eggs or other things that increased your LDL, they saw that there was an increase in your lousy cholesterol, but there's also always an increase in your HDL at the same time. So if they both go up at the same time, your risk of heart disease doesn't change. So that was one misconception. They were purely looking just at LDL, but the HDL goes up at the same time. So no change there. And the other thing that they now realize, just to complicate the matter a little bit more, is that there's 2 types of LDL. So there's the good bad cholesterol, and there's the bad cholesterol. Just to make it a little bit more confusing. So there's particle sizes, that's what they talk about. So there are light and fluffy, big, round LDL cholesterol. And then there's small, dense LDL cholesterol. So beach balls and bullets, okay? The beach balls, they just bounce around in your arteries, and at this point, because I just have to say, at this point we're still learning more, but it does not look like that beach ball LDL has anything to do with heart disease. It's the small, dense LDL that has to do with heart disease. Because it's a much smaller particle, it can get into the cracks of the arteries, and there it gets oxidized and turned into plaque. What it's really trying to do is just repair the cracks that are in our arteries. And how do we get the cracks in our arteries? Well, it comes from having too much sugar and refined grains, all that extra sugar that's flowing around in our blood sugar, whether we have diabetes or not, is causing irritation, inflammation, damage, and that's where the cracks form. So then the LDL goes in and tries to repair it. So the funny thing is that those small, dense LDL are caused by when we have too much sugar and refined carbs. So not only is the same dietary habit causing the cracks, but now it's causing the type of cholesterol that can get in there while it's trying to repair it. It gets into the cracks and gets oxidized. And that's where the plaque buildup starts. So if we can switch back to having more fat in our diet and less of the sugar and refined grains, we're going to be less hungry, right? And all of that saturated fat that we've been worried about actually causes more of the big fluffy LDL. So it changes your particle size, and we no longer will have the cracks in our arteries, and we won't have that small bullets of LDL to repair it and get stuck. So that's kind of the big picture on cholesterol and how dietary factors affect it. And that's where heart disease comes from.
Do those two show up on your labs as different numbers?
Not at this point, unfortunately. The test for the particle size is more expensive, so your doctors probably won't do that test unless you really ask them to do it. But we can predict our particle size by looking at some other numbers. So remember I was talking about HDL and triglycerides. HDL goes up with fat. It actually goes down with sugar and refined grains. Okay? So if we see nice high HDL, then I'm not worried. But if we see HDL that's under 40, it could be down in the 20s, I am going to bet that you are a sugar lover. You are a carbaholic probably. And in the same profile, I will usually see that high HDL equals low triglycerides. If I see low HDL, usually high triglycerides. So if I see low HDL and high triglycerides, to me, that's telling me that your particle size is probably small dense. If you have high HDL and low triglycerides, you probably have light fluffy particle size. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. I know I'm like throwing a whole bunch of abstract stuff at you, so I just wanted to make sure it's coming across all right. So that's what I look at when I look at your cholesterol. So I had this guy, and this is how quickly things can change. I had this guy when I was doing cholesterol screening. He had triglycerides, instead of over 150, they were actually over 650. I couldn't tell you what the exact number was because my machine didn't go that high. So it could have been 651, it could have been 1200. I really have no idea what his triglyceride number was exactly. But when I asked him what he had been eating, he had orange juice every day, which is essentially soda with the amount of sugar that's in there. He had coffee milk every day, so all kinds of, that syrup. And he had at least one candy bar every day. So I said, all right, do me a favor. I am actually going to be at the same site next week. Come back. Don't have any of that sugar until I see you next week. I retested him. His triglycerides was 214. So in 7 days without that sugar, he really fixed his triglycerides pretty well. And I think the last time I was here, I told you about that other lady that had great profile. Everything was right where it needed to be. And then when I came back to see her again, 6 months later, her HDL was really low. Her triglycerides were really high. And I was like, what have you been doing? She was like, I did the Special K diet for 2 weeks. And so that's all refined grains. That's going to wreck your cholesterol. And that was just 2 weeks of her following that Special K diet. So why do diets work? Because in general, they get us to cut back on the crap that we've been eating. And we typically will eat less than what we had before. And so it results in weight loss, but we don't necessarily see what's doing in the inside. And that's the same with the low-fat diets. Yes, typically they worked, especially short term, until people got extremely hungry and couldn't stand it anymore. So you got to find what diet works for you, and typically that diet really should focus on getting rid of the processed foods and getting back to the regular foods and not worrying about fat, because fat is an essential nutrient. Your body can't make certain types of fat, and it can take protein and fats, and it can make a reliable source to replace sugar and refined carbs. So some people tell me, well, you need a certain amount of sugar in your diet. Not necessarily. Your body will do just fine if you cut it back some. And really, you don't need refined sugar at all. You can get your carbohydrates from your vegetables, from whole fruit, from some more whole grains. You can do that and get plenty of what you need. So I've been talking a lot. Does anybody have any stories or any thoughts up until now? If it's in the packets or if it's the instant, they've already done some of the digesting for you, right? Because if it takes 1 minute to make something, they've already processed it to the point where it doesn't need all that soaking and it doesn't need time to cook. That is going to process really quickly in your body. That's going to be a processed grain. If you're doing the steel cut oats or the old-fashioned oats and it takes a while to make them, that's a much better choice. But one thing I tell everybody is if you're going to have carbohydrates, don't have them alone. Okay, so if you're having your oatmeal, and that's something that a lot of people love to do, and unfortunately it's a trap that a lot of people have felt that they had to do because they can't have eggs. Well, you can have eggs, so guilt-free. If you're sick of oatmeal, try eggs for a couple of days and get out of that routine. But if you love oatmeal, have some nuts in your oatmeal. Have some breakfast sausage on the side. Have a couple of eggs just to balance it out with that protein so that you digest slower and it sticks with you longer. Does that make sense? What would you put with your oatmeal as a protein or fat source?
Raisins.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Say that again?
If you think about kind of the things that I was listing, the eggs, the breakfast sausage, nuts, what kind of protein or fat would you put? It doesn't have to be that choice, it could be something else, but to have with your oatmeal.
Well, my first thought would be some kind of fruit.
That is a carbohydrate. A lot of people fall into that trap too, actually. Think about it, get back to me.
Then the eggs would be the next.
Eggs would be the next, yeah. That's another problem that we get into. Fruit is healthy. It's going to give us our natural sugar instead of our chocolate bars and everything. It's going to have fiber that slows down the digestion, and there's all kinds of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, all kinds of stuff that we get for it. So we have the benefit. But when we start stacking carbs on top of carbs on top of carbs, that's when we run into a lot of problem. And then we have no protein to balance it out.
So you said nuts are protein,
Nuts are protein and healthy fats, yep.
not raisins.
No, raisins are a fruit. And raisins are a concentrated, really, because you're taking all the water out of your grapes. And now you're left with a very dehydrated, any dried fruit is going to be much more concentrated. You need less of a volume to get the same amount of sugar that you would have gotten from the actual fruit itself. So nuts would be good to throw it on top, yeah.
And prunes would be the same like raisins?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you love to have raisins in your oatmeal, try to have some extra protein, you know. Instead of having one egg, have a couple of eggs. Have eggs and some breakfast sausage just to balance it out. We've completely, you know how, I know you guys know because I remember the ads with the cereal and they'd say part of a healthy breakfast and you would have the cereal and the egg and the sausage and the toast and it was all there because we had less of each volume and it all kind of balanced itself out. Now we have just taken everything out and we have one thing for breakfast and one thing only. It's only a muffin or only a bowl of cereal with milk, which also has carbohydrates. And so, you know, you go through and you're only having this one food. It's not very balanced anymore. Now, actually, I brought up milk. Milk is your another source of carbohydrates, but there is protein, so it does balance itself out a little bit. And we have stayed away from whole milk products for a very long time. We've switched over to low-fat cheese. We've switched down to 1% or skim milk. And we have low-fat yogurt everywhere. It's very difficult to find full-fat yogurt anymore because we have thought that whole milk was going to cause heart disease. But there are plenty of studies out there that show that whole milk is actually associated with less belly fat and less heart disease and less metabolic syndrome, which is high blood sugars, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. And skim milk is associated with more belly fat and more heart disease, which is opposite of what we thought. And when I really started thinking about the fat content of milk, you know, they add in vitamin A and vitamin D, right? And I don't know if you've seen it, but it says, you know, vitamin A, vitamin D right on the added on the package. They say that they added in. Those are fat-soluble vitamins. Your body's not going to absorb them without fat. So what use is it in skim milk? Doesn't make any sense. So I recommend people go back to just having 2% or whole milk actually, if you're going to have it. Don't worry about your cream in your coffee, unless it's the really sugary flavored stuff.
When you make pancakes and you have to add an egg, is that sufficient or?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Eggs and protein, so why wouldn't it be? It's eggs and protein.
Because you're spreading one egg throughout the whole batch of pancakes. So I don't know. Throw some, make them into like walnut muffins or walnut pancakes or something. I don't know. Because then you're going to throw, well, I mean, if you throw butter on it, yeah, there you go. You got your balance between your butter and your, what's that?
But not the syrup.
The syrup is going to be another carb.
Yeah.
You throw the syrup in, even if it's sugar-free, it's still going to have carbohydrates. And the quantity that we use is not the 1 or 2 teaspoons that they recommend, really. So, exactly. So we're getting way more there. So having something else to balance it out would be a good thing. Yeah. And why are we so afraid of having protein and healthy fats? Why isn't it exciting to have eggs in the morning or breakfast sausage? Breakfast sausage is so easy. I mean, yes, it is a little process, but I found instead of the brown and serve, the Jones company, they have a lot less processed, additives in their breakfast sausage, so it's worth looking into finding less processed stuff. But throw it in the microwave, it's done, you know. So simple to throw with your oatmeal or your pancakes, you know.
So when you have like Hamilton Beach has that little breakfast sandwich maker, which now that you say I can have eggs, I love.
Yes.
But I have to have it with an English. You make it with like an English muffin. So does it matter if I get like a whole wheat versus a regular? Like, does that balance it out more?
Yeah, it would balance it out more. I'm gonna give this a try, see if it works. Okay, so, the whole wheat versus white, you're gonna have a lot more fiber, which slows down the digestion more. So that would be a healthier choice compared to the white. But even, if you're going to Dunkin's and you're getting the refined grain there, it tastes horrible, but at least you're balancing it out better than, just the muffins or something like that, So yes, whole grains would definitely be the better choice. But that's a great balance, especially if you put egg and cheese and ham or bacon or something like that in there. Great sandwich.
And I do find that when I have that in the morning, I don't get hungry this early. Like by 10:30, I'm normally like, oh my God, I'm like, need to eat. But when I have that, I can go longer with.
Ding, ding, ding. And that's what we're going for, right? We don't want to have to be hungry every 2 or 3 hours. That is so time consuming beyond everything else, beyond the fact that you have to think about what you have to eat in the next couple of hours. You have to take time to prepare it. You have to make sure you have it with you. Plus the hunger is different. Have you noticed the hunger is different? When you have carbs and carbs only, you get hungry and you get hungry fast. And your body's like, please feed me now or somebody's gonna die, right? Or at least that's my days of carb. I went to Disneyland, Disney World with my boyfriend, now husband, and at the time, he had been there a whole bunch, and he was like, wherever you want to go, we'll go, you haven't really been here. And, but then he would see the signs of Cranky Amanda coming on, and he'd go like, okay, let's go eat something. And I'm like, but I want to go on the ride. So, he would see the signs coming on and try to feed me before there was a real meltdown, and I was 27. So the hunger is different. It is a more sustained energy when you have protein and fats in your diet. So the hunger becomes more of a, I should eat soon. I think I'm starting to feel a rumble, instead of like the lightheadedness and everything that goes along with your body running out of carbs.
It gives you time to process, to make something that's not processed.
Right. Yep. It's not like just shove anything in your face that you can deal with making an actual meal.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So you do have more time, exactly. So, any other questions or thoughts on the subject? Has anybody been increasing their protein at meals or healthy fats? Yeah. How have you been doing that?
More meat and eggs in the morning, and breakfast sausage too. My son
Yeah.
loves it, so
Excellent.
it's motivation to do it all and stuff.
Very good. Very good.
I don't have time to cook.
You don't have time.
I don't have time to make breakfast, so I drink a shake in the morning.
What kind of shake do you have?
We have this new one, this pure protein shake. It has like 20 grams of protein and 1 gram of sugar. But I read the label and I made sure there was like nothing bad in it.
Good. Very good. So at least you are starting your day with some protein, and that is a very good thing. Do you make it with just water or?
No, it's I grabbed the one pre-made, the one that's ready in the
Oh,
bottle.
okay.
Because I have the powder, I have the lean shake powder, but the fact that I leave my house, I leave my house and I drive to work, and sometimes I don't have time to like make it.
Yeah.
So I just start buying the one that's already pre-made, throw it in my bag and so I have those until I leave work, because I don't know, like in the morning I'm not near my house. I'm like all the way out to the Bedford, so instead of me going out try to buy junk like I used to, I try to like eat something that's gonna keep me full until 12 or like 11 till I get back to college and I can run to my house and eat something.
Good, yeah.
Get back to work.
Yeah. Yeah. One suggestion I throw out to people, if you're trying to have more eggs in the morning or something quick to go, I mean the breakfast sausage are really quick. You can just microwave them. The other thing is I make up a whole dozen of hard-boiled eggs in the morning. Not in the morning, but on Sunday. And I peel them, because if I don't peel them, I'm not going to eat them. And so I have them in a container, and I just grab those and go. I'll just like cut them up and put a little salt and pepper, that kind of thing. How did you increase your protein in?
It was mostly with eggs. We got more eggs and meat, lean meat, chicken. Chicken.
Okay, so this, I just don't want you guys to fall into a trap, which a lot of people do when they cut back on carbohydrates and they really amp up their protein. That's not the whole point, okay? We have to increase our fat as well. So we need to start putting butter on things. We need to go back to, you know, cream cheese, sour cream. That's absolutely fine. Cooking with our olive oil or with our coconut oil. Increasing our you know, nuts and our seeds. Increasing our avocados. You know, all of these different nut butters, different ways to increase our fat.
They just had a segment on the Today Show last week where they were talking a little bit about what you're talking about, and they were encouraging to add back in eggs and the shellfish, but they still put butter on the do not.
Yeah, they haven't come around yet. They will. I predict.
So it's just a lot of conflicting information out
It
there
is.
that you should know.
It is. And so that's why I want you guys to start researching for yourself. If you care enough about your nutrition, which I think you do because you're here, start looking into the information yourself, and you'll find a lot of people talking about the fact that saturated fat is not bad. There was just an article on Diet Doctor. I'm looking at Dave because he goes on to dietdoctor.com along with me. And it's a blog by a Swedish doctor, actually, who has been following low-carb, high-fat for over 8 years. His cholesterol is wonderful. He has 2 beautiful little girls that are very, very healthy on a low-carb, high-fat diet. And they're getting all the nutrients that they need because they're eating real food. And so there's no worries. And so he's up on top of the latest stuff that's going around. And I wish I had printed out all those headlines. A lot of people just this week were talking about the fact that the saturated fat guidelines are based on the same crap I was explaining this morning. And it's really not based on very good science. They just kind of took what science they had and ran with it. And they didn't go back. Well, of course, they tried to go back and prove that low fat was good. And any studies that were showing that saturated fat is okay, they just kind of swept them under the rug. You saw what happened with Dr. Atkins. He was absolutely criticized. But turns out he was right. And for anybody who may have heard that Dr. Atkins died of heart disease, he did not. He died because he fell on ice and he hit his head and he ended up with cardiomyopathy, which is a virus type thing, not his cholesterol. So it had nothing to do with that. He had a very healthy cholesterol profile.
So, okay, the gist of it is stay away from refined sugars, processed like bread,
Yeah.
things like that. What about the foods like potatoes, or sweet potatoes, or carrots even, or
It depends on, you need to find what level you can tolerate. Some people can tolerate a small amount, but we can't be having like the huge baked potatoes that you get at Wendy's. You know, that is just too big. That's 60 grams of carbs at one shot. It's just too much for our bodies. Most people do really best when they stay around 30 to 45 grams of carbs per meal. Some people can only tolerate 30 to 45 grams of carbs per day. So you gotta find, you know, where you fit in the spectrum. So that's why I don't.
how do you find that?
Experimentation, you know? So some people, and I through my own experience, I've learned that if you start on the more restrictive end and you start adding back in, kind of like Atkins does, or South Beach, you know, they both do the same kind of thing. As you add back things back in, as long as you're still losing weight, you know that you're having less carbs than your body can tolerate. Once you get to the point where your weight is stable, that is your area that your body can tolerate. I did backwards. And it took me a lot longer. That's why I'm telling you that you probably should start that way. I started by just cutting back, and I couldn't get rid of the cravings easily. So then I would get to the point where I was losing weight, everything was looking really great, and then I would be like, oh, I'm good. I can have a cookie or whatever, or I a lot easier to just cut back severely, get rid of the cravings if you have them. I am a carbaholic. I still have issues with it. You know, so the more sugar you eat, the more you crave. The less sugar you eat, the less you crave. And so if you can cut back and get through those cravings for the first couple days, like somebody who's quitting cigarettes, the first 3 days are the hardest. And then you can slowly add your carbohydrates back in to see what you can tolerate. Does that make sense? But everybody in this room is different. Everybody in this room is going to have a different amount that they can tolerate. And the beautiful thing is that you guys are here doing exercise. That also helps your body tolerate carbs better, you know. But with the society that we live in, which is a low-fat, high-carb society, we are very focused on having our muffins that are 60 to 80 grams of carbs for a breakfast. Or IHOP, you could end up with a plate of pancakes that are 150 grams of carbs for that pancakes, probably before the syrup that you put on there. If you go out to Olive Garden, most of their plates are going to be about 100 or more grams of carbs. There's desserts that are out there. You know how big those desserts can be. They could be upwards of 200 grams of carbs in one dessert. So if you guys have, I wanted to bring this stuff too, because I have some books here. I talked about the guy last time, this guy, Jimmy Moore. He had been 410 pounds and he had lost 180. And he's written these 2 books that are both very, very interesting. This one is relevant to today's conversation, Cholesterol Clarity. And I love the fact that he says, what the HDL is wrong with my numbers. So he goes through everything that I have been talking about today, refined sugars and how they impact your blood sugars, your cholesterol, and how saturated fat really has nothing to do with it. Keto Clarity is just a book about really cutting back your carb intake and going into ketosis, which is an absolutely fine thing to do. I think we discussed that last time. This book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, is a dense read. I'm just going to put it out there. I only got halfway through. Very interesting though. But he actually put out another book, which is on loan to somebody I know. That's why I have it today. But it's called Why We Get Fat, and it's by this guy, Gary Taubes. That is the book that changed my practice and why I eat the way I do, and the way I've gotten into the research and finding out the most latest information. This is the latest Atkins book, which talks about how to do it, but has a lot of the same science in it. A book called Fat Chance by Robert Lustig. He's a doctor who has really been looking at sugar and the fructose side of it, because table sugar is half glucose, half fructose. And he's really looked at the fructose side of it, looking at how it is actually a toxin to our liver. And it is the main reason why people end up with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and why our triglycerides go up when we have a lot of sugar. And so this book is all about processed food and sugar. And then the diet doctor, the Swedish doctor, he came out with a book, finally came into English recently. He's translated all over the world, but it's called Low Carb, High Fat Food Revolution. And another really very interesting book. So there are resources out there if you are interested in knowing more about why I recommend the things I do that is not recommended by your public authorities. Because the USDA is going to take a while to admit that it has been wrong for the past 40 years. But it should not take us that long to wait to fix ourselves when the science is out there, and we should go by what is actually working. Another very interesting website is called Authority Nutrition, and they have a whole bunch. They're very science-based, but easy to read. So it's not like everything I'm recommending here is, with the exception of this one, is very easy to read, very easy to process. It was a little hard for me to process just because it was completely opposite to what I had been talking about for years before. And it is different from what our popular culture, has been talking about, but this is what the science is supporting. So, check it out for yourself. Don't just trust me. Don't just trust the people on the news. Look into it for yourself. Oh. Yeah, so, coconut milk is a nice alternative to regular milk. Make sure you get the unsweetened. I have vanilla and I have plain here. These are just empty boxes, but I get them at Job Lot. They're the cheapest there for $2 each. And so I find them to be a nice alternative to milk because milk has 12 grams of carbs per cup. This only has 2 grams of carbs per cup, and they taste about the same. They have a nice thick taste. They don't really taste like coconut, honestly. At least, yeah, and I find them good. And tomato sauce is one of those things that ends up having a lot of sugar. If you were just to take the tomatoes and grind them up, you're not going to end up with that much sugar, but they sweeten it to make it more palatable. This brand called Frank's, he has 3 different varieties. This is just the original, but he has one with like basil and I can't remember what the third one is, but very tasty. And this one only has 4 grams of carbs per serving compared to 9, 13. Some of them can get really pretty crazy with the sugar that they add into them. This one I get at Dave's. I need to go and explore. I don't know if it's at Stop and Shop and Shaw's, but I live in Warwick, and therefore Dave's is the closest one to me, so that's where I found it. But they are made, they're out of Connecticut, so they're local, which is nice, Glastonbury, Connecticut. So I imagine they're probably sold around here.
Stop and shop guy.
Yeah, go take a look. They're a little bit more expensive than your Prego or Ragu or something, but I know that I'm getting less carbs, and I don't have pasta all that time, all that much. If I do, it's spaghetti squash usually. So I don't have this very often, or if I'll have it with my Italian sausage or something like that. But. So I don't go through it as much as I used to when I had pasta all the time. So I guess the last thing I'll say about hunger and changing the way we eat, some of these foods may seem more expensive. The coconut oil, the different more specialty kind of stuff that is low in sugar. But if you are not as hungry, you don't have to eat the same volume that you did. Your body naturally will tell you to stop eating. Instead of you having to count calories and go, I've reached my amount, it's only 12 in the afternoon, So you don't have to stop yourself because of the numbers. Your body will automatically regulate itself the way it's supposed to. And your food bill shouldn't be any more expensive that way. If anybody wants to stay longer and talk, I don't mind. But
What was that problem with when we over